Hey weirdos, I'm Ash.
And I'm Elena.
And this right here, this little thing you're listening to, is Morbid.
This is Morbid.
I was trying to sound like Victoria from The White Lotus, thank you.
There you go.
I think that's her name, Parker Posey's character.
I have no idea. I haven't watched that yet.
Oh,
I know.
I don't,
I'm
you know
trying.
what?
It takes me a long time for...
I don't know if it's your bag.
Every time someone mentions it, I'm like, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know why it doesn't
I love
lose
it.
me, but...
And it's like a great show. I would recommend. I would recommend it to most
You
people. I was
absolutely
gonna say. I don't know if you would love it.
You don't know if I like it?
No.
I mean, maybe I'll give it a shot and see.
I mean, go for it.
You like, do it. You're your own person. You're allowed.
Live your best life, bitch. But I'm liking this season, and I was just playing Elena a clip of Parker Posey's interview where she does all her weird voices.
Her southern accent.
Tsunami!
Well,
that was a good one.
That was really good.
Thank you.
I liked that.
Thank you so much.
No, Ash has just gotten me into Yellow Jackets, so I'm almost done with the first season. I dig it.
She's not current, so don't give her any spoilers because I will come for you.
Yeah, don't give me spoilers. I'm trying to...
I'm current.
Yeah.
Guys, we're in the fucking trenches.
In the thick of it.
We are.
I'm trying
Into
to
the
get
thick
there.
of it.
It takes us a long time to get through a show, John and I, so...
They're coming up on
We're getting there.
episode 7
of the first season. So there we
There's
are.
so many things I want to say.
It's really good, though.
I was going to signify something to the listeners, but I can't.
I love Christina Ricci.
I would
with
lay
the
down
fire of 1,000 suns.
I would lay down my life for
Yeah,
her.
I love her so much. That's all I can say about it. But also, I'm sure we're weeks out at this point, but
Probably.
pretty cool that Tobias Forge was on the show. Huh?
Do you guys understand how hard it was for both
It
of
was
us to keep
so
that
hard.
from you?
So hard.
Right now, you're glowing.
I'm glowing.
You're
It was
glowing.
so fun. It was so fun.
He's always a fun guest.
He's delightful.
He's a very, very nice man.
He is delightful. And we got to have Doug Bradley on.
Doug congratulated me because he congratulated Tobias on his success. He congratulated Elena on her book. And he said, I didn't congratulate you on anything, Ash. I said, that's fine. I just exist. And he congratulated me on being wonderful.
Just being wonderful.
I said, thank you so much.
Doug Bradley forever.
I'll remember that for the rest of my life.
Doug and his wife Steph are two of my favorite people.
They're
they're
cool.
just delightful people.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a fun little surprise we had because Tobias and Doug are bros
buds.
there. So because he called him Toby through the whole thing.
Toby.
It was amazing.
Doug Bradley's voice is the most calming
very
voice I've ever heard
soothing.
in my life.
Very soothing.
If I need to be like, can I call him when I'm having a panic attack?
You should.
Just be like, Doug.
Why not? Just
Doug,
be like,
help.
calm me down. He reads books on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
So if you ever want to hear Doug Bradley read a book,
boom,
that's
what I'll do next time I have a panic attack.
He can just read you a story.
There you go.
But it was a lot of fun. We got to talk about the new album, which has finally been announced, Skeleton.
Very cool.
And I got to hear it.
Elena got to hear
A
it
little bit of a flex.
real early. That's a big flex.
I'm excited about you guys are going to love it. And I can't wait to see everybody at the shows this year. So we can all freak out together.
It's got a different vibe.
But it's so fucking
It's cool. I think it's a really cool vibe.
It is so fucking good. And you guys have heard Satanized. So fun.
Mm-hmm. And the music video for that is awesome.
We got to see Papa Perpetua.
And we got some inside scoop on that music video.
Yeah.
So if you haven't listened to that episode, you got to go listen.
Yeah, you got to listen.
Because there's a cool fun fact in there.
There is.
Toby confirmed.
Toby confirmed.
If I may.
It was really cool, though. And you guys have been so sweet. The comments on that video so far, you guys are just really sweet because you know how excited I am about it. Yeah. And everybody's just been really kind, and I appreciate that.
As they should be, queen.
This is a win for all of us. It is. And you're all going to fucking love the new album, and I can't wait to see you and hang out with you at the Ghost shows because I love running into people who listen to the show at those.
As Adore Delano says, party.
Let's go.
Party.
So that's really fun. We hope you dug it. 2025 has been pretty sweet. Outside of the entire world crumbling.
Well, I think it makes
in my own little bubble.
Yeah, it makes you cling harder to the things that are
wins.
That are good. Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like the wins. You got to celebrate the wins right now because
they're few and motherfucking far between.
Outside of those, it's rough. So celebrate your wins.
Yes.
And also
be excited about the things you want to be excited about.
Exactly. I saw Elise Myers, who again.
I love
Who doesn't
Elise.
love Elise Myers? I saw her say something about how she almost got embarrassed because she got very excited about something.
Yeah.
And someone told her to like calm it down.
Fuck that.
And she was like, I almost got embarrassed. And then I said, fuck that.
No.
Like, I am very lucky to be excited about things. So I'm going to continue to.
And why the fuck are you on the planet? Like, what
if
does
you're not
all of this
excited.
even mean?
Yeah.
If you're not excited
So just like
about things. Not all the
be
time,
excited
obviously,
about
but
things.
yeah.
If something excites you and gets you going and makes you excited, be as excited as you want to be and don't feel embarrassed about it. And don't make, because especially if other adults are trying to be like, oh, you're so weird, you're so cringy, that means that they've never had something to be that excited about. And what we should feel is pity for them.
And
so
what are
make
we
sure that
all-
you are excited about the things you should be because you have earned your excitement.
What are we all? Everybody's just looking for something to be excited about.
Yeah, what are we on this planet for if you can't get excited about shit?
Yes.
I thought, like, get excited.
And get excited about whatever the fuck you want to. I'm excited.
And I hope you all have shit to be excited for.
Yes.
And I hope you do.
Big, small, medium, in between, doesn't matter. Be
I'm
excited.
manifesting that for all of y'all.
Yeah, I got a new couch and I am fucking
yeah.
stoked about it.
Get excited about it. Go crazy.
I just start jumping on the couch like Tom Cruise.
Celebrate that. You just slide through the living room in your underwear.
I just might.
You can
might.
do. I love it.
What is that, Risky Business?
Yeah, Risky Business.
Yeah.
All the Tom Cruise.
You know what's so funny? I'm of the age that just makes me think of Rob's character in Never Been Kissed.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's also a great one.
A great movie, but
That
wow,
is a
don't
great
ever
one.
think too deeply about it.
No, definitely don't.
Just take it for what it is.
Pretty horrifying when you think about it at its core.
Yeah, watching that as an adult for the first time, you're
go,
like,
oh.
As a kid, I'm like, oh my God, romance and love. That's so cool. And then I watched it as an adult for the first time,
said,
like a few years ago, and I was like, this movie's dark as fuck.
It is. It's dark.
But
it's
love
a
it.
horror movie.
It
At
is
its
a horror movie.
At its core, it's a horror movie.
That scene at the prom when they're dancing
No.
to the dun, dun, dun,
No.
dun, dun.
It's
It's a race and rewind. I have been obsessed with that song since I was like 6 years old because of that movie.
That's a diabolical
But
scene.
It's
diabolical.
That's the thing. That's the thing.
It's rough.
It's different.
But you know what? I'm gonna talk about something pretty terrible right now.
Well, it is morbid.
So, coming off of a really sneakily horrifying movie, we're gonna go into something that is equally sneakily as horrifying.
Oh, is it?
Molasses.
What?
Yep.
Like
We're
gingerbread cookie molasses?
like straight up molasses. We're going to talk about Boston's Great Molasses Flood of 1919.
If you've ever been on a duck tour, you know they mention it.
Come on to Boston.
Yep.
We'll tell you all about
We
it.
will. Oh my God, and do a duck tour. It's so fun.
Do a duck tour if you come to Boston. It's a lot of fun.
It is.
And
They're silly.
You get a lot of nifty little history facts. You'll
Yeah,
learn a lot.
You do.
Also, do some of the we're not being paid by like the city of Boston to do this. I'm just like, if you're those walking tours too.
Oh my gosh, I love those.
A lot of them are fun.
They are.
They dress up like, like they're from the period.
yeah,
We
like
talk
Minutemen.
about the revolution, all the fun stuff. Do it. It's fun.
Study the revolution.
This was not great at all. And it's like it's remembered and it's mentioned, but I feel like it's lesser remembered and mentioned as we go on.
I didn't learn about this in school.
Which is pretty terrible.
Actually, the first time I ever learned about this was on a duck tour.
Yeah, see, and that's crazy.
Yeah.
The fact that we don't talk about this, like, it's a wild story, and it had a high death toll. This was a tragic event that happened in
I don't know
Boston.
a lot about it.
Yeah, it caused an unbelievable damage to one of the city's oldest neighborhoods, and it injured more than 150 people.
Damn.
And 21 people died.
Yeah, that
including
I did know.
children. There were children that died, and I mean, not like one life over the other, but like it's awful.
Yeah.
And again, for an event that was so like remarkable and very strange, like it's a strange event.
It is,
a molasses flood. Like that's weird. It's still kind of unknown exactly what caused it to happen. It happened at the Purity Distilling Company. Their molasses storage tank was the one that burst and dumped its contents across the North End. And it really is one of Boston's most bizarre pieces of
Oh, absolutely.
history and folklore to this day. Like, It's so tragic and so bizarre.
Boston has like a lot of bizarre history, actually.
We're pretty bizarre. We're bizarre.
Yeah, Boston's
We're bizarre, kid. So by the final months of 1918, Boston, like many other cities around the United States, had been through it. Been through it.
Yeah.
That summer, the influenza pandemic hit the city really hard, and there were more than 200 deaths by the end of the season. Thousands more were going to be lost before things were even under control. It was really bad. The pandemic had forced a lot of the theaters, nightclubs, and restaurants to close down. We've seen that before. We've seen that repeat.
Yep.
And the city's cemeteries had been forced to erect, like, circus tents, essentially, on the grounds in order to hide the backlog of unburied coffins from public view. Yeah.
That's brutal.
Yeah, it was as though there was nowhere in the city that somebody could go to just avoid reminders of tragedy, loss, and hardship. It was not a good time.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to the calamity caused by the flu, the end of World War I presented a lot of challenges to those whose businesses had been forced to kind of like pivot and reorient themselves to accommodate increased manufacturing needs of the military. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company, the USIA is what I'll call them. For example, they had been one of the nation's largest producers of industrial alcohol for the military during the war years. But with the demand for munitions kind of dropping in the final months of the war, the USIA kind of found themselves in a position of having to, again, pivot the other way and develop new products and strategies just to remain in business. Now, before the war, a certain percentage of USIA's output was grain alcohol, and many on the company's board felt that the shift back to producing grain alcohol was precisely the type of quick pivot necessary to keep this company going, at least for a short term.
Yeah.
The problem, though, was that retooling the Cambridge plant to produce grain alcohol was going to take a lot of time. And the production of the liquor itself took time, and time was not something that a lot of people had.
It was not of the essence.
Yeah, it was in short supply at that time. The constitutional amendment banning the manufacture and sales of alcohol in the U.S. had passed both houses the previous December and was set to go into effect in January 1920.
Oh, no!
That meant USIA would have just a little more than a year of production before ceasing operations completely.
So they needed to get out all they could.
Yeah, they got to get out. But the company, determined that if they could distill a sufficient amount of alcohol in the first quarter, they would have enough time to get it bottled and shipped out before Prohibition went into effect, thereby saving the company. That November, USIA's company secretary, Arthur Gell, placed a large order for molasses from Cuba. This was going to be scheduled to be delivered in mid-January 1919. That gave Gell and the company enough time to retrofit the Cambridge plant, like get it ready to do this kind of production, to caulk the massive storage tank on Commercial Street, which was on Boston's Wharf, and develop a schedule for round-the-clock production once the molasses actually arrived. Now, Gell had been integral to the operations and really all the strategic planning of the company, and had also been instrumental in guiding them through what was really like uncertainty in the war years. He helped them kind of stay the course. So if anyone could pull off the temporary reorientation of this plant, it was going to be Gell.
Maybe.
Now, to those who'd lost their jobs to the pandemic closures or,
So weird to hear that.
it really is like history really does repeat itself.
It surely does.
And so they either lost it to the pandemic closures or they lost it for, in the downturn of demand for manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
The USIA's new production strategy, even if it was temporary, was a welcome piece of news to them because they were like, I'll take anything at this point. The retrofit of the distillery and the resealing of the tank meant dozens, if not hundreds, of new job opportunities were now arising.
Which is great.
And these were job opportunities for metal workers, machine operators, and plant hands, all of whom were going to be working like round-the-clock overtime to get everything done on this like really tight turnaround timeline. Still, filling these positions wouldn't be as easy as it would be under normal circumstances because, again, the outbreak of the pandemic had kind of knocked out countless ordinary able-bodied workers. So it's not like everybody was ready to jump back to work. So Gell was going to have to take what he could if he was going to have everything ready on time. He just had to work with it. So already we're seeing like, uh-oh.
Yeah, not great to start out like that.
And I'm sure this isn't shocking, but unfortunately, significant problems presented themselves almost immediately.
Oh, goody.
The north end tank, which was to hold the molasses when it arrived, had been pretty hastily built in 1915 to meet the unexpected demands of war.
I feel like you don't want to hastily build a
giant tank. Yeah,
and
you
any
don't want
kind
to
of
do that.
tank, really.
No. Because of this, when the metal workers from Walter Fields and Sons began caulking the seams of the steel tank, the flaws were pretty apparent immediately.
Oof.
According to author Stephen Puleo, I believe it's Puleo, I hope I'm saying his name correctly.
It sounded like you said his good name.
His good name. I don't want to ruin his good name. Stephen, I hope I'm saying your good name correctly. So according to Stephen, he said, quote, molasses leaked from several different seams, squeezing through the rivets and sliding down the steel walls like lazy brown rivers, plopping onto the pavement below and spreading slowly into thick pools.
Fun.
Whenever the men would hose off the tank's exterior, beads of dark molasses would just reappear almost immediately at the seams.
Oh, no. We should probably empty that tank, y'all.
Yeah. The job was frustrating and pretty arduous as well, but finally, just one day before Christmas, the tank was finished and it was deemed ready for the molasses shipment.
It's a Christmas miracle.
It's a Christmas miracle. We can fill it with molasses. On January 12th, 1919, the ship, which was called the Malero, arrived in Boston Harbor from Cuba, carrying 1.3 million gallons. 600,000 gallons of which was going to be pumped into the USIA's tank in the north end of molasses.
Blink, 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 blink.
1.3 million gallons came over on that ship.
Damn.
600,000 gallons was going into that tank.
I don't think there's any way for me to actually appropriately
conceive of that
in my mind.
Yeah, I just can't. My brain won't conceive of it.
No.
It's a lot of molasses.
Oh, on one boat that came
One
over?
ship. It was like a big cargo ship.
I mean, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But damn.
I know.
That's
it's
crazy.
So despite the freezing temperatures and even colder wind chill, because remember, we're in Boston in January.
Honey, it's cold.
The molasses, which had been warmed in advance, moved smoothly through the pump into the tank, and by the following morning, the shipment was completed.
Probably smelled so good in there.
Oh, so good.
Like gingerbread cookies.
Yeah, exactly. With their job done, the ship left the docks, headed for Brooklyn, where they were going to deliver the remainder of the molasses. Now, not long after the ship had left the harbor, residents and workers in the area of the wharf began to hear some sounds. They heard some loud cracking and pinging sounds.
That's never a sound you really want to hear.
So this was a sound, the warm molasses was mixing with the cold, thick molasses that was already in the tank.
Oh.
Now, this was not entirely foreign to hear these kinds of sounds, because since being built several years earlier, locals had grown accustomed to like some metallic groans emanating from the tank as like different liquids settled.
Yeah.
Because it is a cold tank. It's like, you know, you're going to hear some sounds.
Yeah, and especially mixing the warm with the cold.
Exactly. What the locals didn't know, though, at this time was that the mix of old and new molasses increased the temperature inside the tank, which set off the fermentation process and produced gases in that process.
Oh, shit.
With the tank now holding a whopping 2.3 million gallons of molasses.
Holy shit.
It was nearly at full capacity.
Not even completely.
Leaving very little room for expansion, and it couldn't it was just trapping the gases in this small amount of headspace remaining in the tank, which is not good.
That's not good. Sometimes that happens with my sourdough starter, and it sounds like there's a gas leak in my house.
There you go.
Drew and I were literally sitting on the couch one night, and it was like, and I was like, what the fuck? We literally searched everywhere. We were like,
thinking
oh my God.
A gas leak.
And it was my fucking sourdough starter.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's scary.
That was very scary.
That's why I can't do sourdough. I'm too scared.
There's so many reasons you can't. Sourdough freaks
It's the feeding it. It's the...
Elena thinks it's too human.
It's that thing telling you it's hungry. And
like,
I can't do it, man. So the first few weeks of January in Boston, like normal, had been frigidly cold. Yep. Temperatures were as low as 2 degrees. But on the morning of the 15th, as often happens...
We got a heat wave.
They awoke to find an unseasonably warm day. It's just suddenly like, oh, we're in spring now.
And unseasonably warm for Boston in that time is like 48 degrees.
Yeah, exactly. We're like, shit.
We're like, oh my God, flip-flops, babe.
Holy shit. And It eventually reached into the 40s.
I called it.
We were there.
A true Bostonian.
That's it. Oh, when it hits the 40s, you're like, you don't have to wear a jacket. We're fine.
No, I literally stopped wearing my jacket.
Throw that sweatshirt on.
Yes.
We're here for a light sweater day.
I don't know how warm it is today, but I've been rolling without a jacket.
It's gorgeous today.
It's gorgeous.
And what is,
let's see.
I was just going to say we have
43 degrees. It's 43 degrees.
And I'm like, it's gorgeous.
I'm like, oh my God. It's also so fucking windy out today.
It is. It's literally got like 90 miles per hour winds. Legit. And we're like, it's beautiful out.
Yeah, the wind gusts right now are 23 miles an hour.
Feels great outside.
45.
But we saw the sun, so there's that.
Yeah, we always look for that.
So yeah, it's been freezing in Boston, but on this day, the 15th of January, it was unseasonably warm in the 40s.
Everybody wanted to go out, huh?
Everyone's outside because it's gorgeous.
And you got to get some air.
On the wharf, the workers from USIA, the workers there began preparing for the days to come, when the giant molasses tank would be emptied onto railroad cars and taken to Cambridge, where it was going to be fermented and processed. This was going to be a big job, so they were getting ready for it.
All right.
A little past 12:30 p.m., everyone on the wharf was going about the usual business, loading, unloading cargo, milling about on lunch breaks, normal thing. After such a long period of freezing temperatures, the warm weather, like we always say, it hits the 40s. It's early spring here. So let's go. And many of the residents and workers, like we were saying, didn't want to miss a chance to be outside on such a lovely spring day.
Because you get so fucking cooped up.
And everything's dry and you feel like you just gotta get some air. You get cabin fever. Mm-hmm. That's what everyone's outside.
Yeah.
Like we were saying, everybody's outside. It's a beautiful day. Then they heard the sounds.
Oh, God.
The sounds would freak me the fuck out. These are loud, scary sounds.
It's like apocalyptic sounding.
Oh, it's awful. And it was unlike anything they'd ever heard coming from the direction of the giant molasses tank. Later, Boston police officer Frank McManus would describe...
That is, I could not let that go. Frank.
Oh,
Frankie McManus.
That's like, that's,
Frankie McMahon. That's my guy. That's my gold boy.
You know Frankie McManus.
Obsessed.
He would describe it as, quote, a machine gun-like rat-tat-tat sound and an unearthly grinding and scraping. A bleeding that sounded like the wail of a wounded beast.
He should probably write something.
Frankie McManus, if you don't write a book.
Frankie McManus is a goddamn poet. That's fucking horrifying, though.
Because you're probably sitting there like, what the fuck is that?
Did the side of the earth just get cracked?
I'd be scared. The apocalypse, like the four horsemen were on their way. I'd be like, what's going on?
You hear the trumpets?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm still waiting.
That idea scares the shit out of me.
That happens sometimes though.
The trumpeting?
Yeah, people hear that shit.
I think it's all fake, personally, but I appreciate it because it scares the shit out of me no matter what.
Of course it's fake because otherwise the end of the world would have happened.
It's definitely fake, but the videos whenever they used to show those where it was like, we're hearing trumpeting in the skies. And sometimes people hear other things though that sound like it. And it's still scary as fuck.
Yeah, no matter what.
So I appreciate how terrifying it is.
I don't want to hear shit like that.
No, I don't want that. I don't
keep that away from me.
Royal Albert Lehman, a brakeman for the Boston Elevated Railroad, was driving the train when, quote, his ears filled with the scream of tearing steel.
Oh, God.
North End resident Martin Clougherty heard a deep rumble that woke him from his sleep. Joseph Hiller was on his way back to work on the docks when he heard it and he felt the rumble. When he looked in the direction of the harbor, he, quote, saw the big tank open up and fall apart.
Holy shit.
While the wall of molasses, 50 feet high in the front, rolled out over the ground with a seething, hissing sound.
50 feet high.
And if you've ever baked with molasses,
it's goo.
Just a jar of molasses.
It is so viscous.
Think of that. And now think of what that can do. And it's like the Blob. It's literally like a horror movie.
Well, and I assume it's rushing at you first.
Oh yeah, it's gonna asphyxiate you in a second. You can't move,
and it's like quicksand.
Oh yeah, you're stuck in it. Think of how sticky that is and thick.
Oh my God, how did they even clean that up?
I know. So later that day, the Boston Globe reported once the low rumbling sound was heard, no one had a chance to escape.
Oh, that's horrifying.
And the scene on the docks, which was very calm, very serene a few minutes earlier, had been thrown into total chaos and panic. From his train car on the elevated tracks, Lehman, who we talked about before, looked out the window and saw, quote, a black mass bearing down on him, darkening the sky.
Jesus Christ.
Just before he felt the tracks buckle and the train begin to tip.
Oh, God.
In his bedroom on the 3rd floor, Martin Clougherty came to several feet of molasses. And he said, it didn't dawn on me that it was molasses I was in, but it was already all around me.
Martin and he's in his apartment, so
in
it
his
broke
house.
Through his fucking, oh my God.
Martin told a reporter from the Globe, I thought I was overboard. A pile of wreckage was holding me down, and a little way from me, I saw my sister.
Oh my God.
Now, the Clougherty's house had been hit by the giant wave of molasses and knocked from its foundation.
Oh.
Take that in. It had been knocked, a house was knocked from its foundation.
So he came to where? Like
he was the whole house was sent into the elevated train line.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Martin said it seemed as if the house had split in two when it hit the elevated structure, and I was in one side and my people in the other.
What the fuck?
The Clougherty's house was just one of the many structures in the neighborhood that was completely demolished by the wave of molasses. According to the Globe, the buildings seemed to cringe up as though they were made of pasteboard. As Mary Musco looked out her window and across the street to the Clougherty's house, she said she saw the entire building, quote, fly into the air.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You can't even conceive of that.
You can't conceive of it.
No.
Like, it's so gnarly what happened here. Moving as fast as 35 miles per hour, the wave of molasses that flooded the North End devastated everything in its path.
Of course it did. 6
buildings in the immediate vicinity of the tank were completely gone, just totally demolished, flattened.
Within seconds,
and one of the steel beams supporting the elevated train line was knocked down.
A steel beam.
The public works horses who were kept in the stalls near the wharf were either smothered in the flood or, quote, so severely injured as their stables collapsed that they were shot by policemen to end their suffering.
Oh, that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate that.
On Commercial Street, a man walking underneath the elevated train line was thrown from his feet and sent several feet into the air before landing hard on his face and hands.
Oh, God.
Nearby, Charles Whitby was driving his wagon down Commercial Street when he was struck by the wave. He was thrown from the cart as he had flipped, and it sent him into the brake wall and killed his horse.
Oh my God.
A few yards from him, 2 train cars had been knocked from the tracks and thrown into nearby lampposts, knocking them free from the ground. So the lampposts are flying. Like, this is literally catastrophic.
A disaster.
Like, apocalyptic, just things, houses, trains, cars flying everywhere.
And it's probably not occurring to anyone in the moment that it's
what
molasses.
The fuck is happening?
So they're probably just like, what the fuck is this?
Seriously. Like, how
it would never
even
occur to you that that's molasses.
No. Like, what the fuck is this?
Right.
At the diner on Commercial Street across from the wharf, Robert Burnett was eating lunch with his family when the tank burst. He said there was a rumble, no roar or explosion. That's what he told the Boston Post. And he said, I thought it was an elevated train until I heard a swish as if a wind was rushing. Then it became dark. I looked out the window and saw this great black wave coming. It didn't rush. It just rolled slowly. It seemed like the side of a mountain falling into space.
Oh, God.
Of course, it came quickly, but we all had a chance to jump and run before the windows began to crack. Then it poured molasses.
Holy shit.
Like, what?
How do you even, like, look at that and... What do you even...
How do you even do anything? I'd be like, what is happening right now?
I'd be frozen with fear.
Yeah. He grabbed his family and they fled the restaurant. But by the time they'd reached the front door, the molasses had reached the top of the 14-step flight of stairs, blocking the only exit.
Oh, no.
Instead, the Burnetts rushed up to the roof where they watched in absolute horror as the entire neighborhood was overtaken by this flood. Just watched from a roof. Now, naturally, those closest to the tank suffered the worst of the damage. Yeah. A freight agent at the Boston and Worcester Street Railway Company, H.M. Dorley, was working in one of the sheds about 15 feet from the tank when he heard the giant, loud, massive crack and the ground shook. He told,
weird, as you're saying that, the wind is going crazy
just shook.
And shaking the house.
It did. Doralee told the Post, the broken parts of the tank missed our shed only by a matter of inches.
Wow.
If they had stuck it, well, I wouldn't be talking with you.
Damn.
Parts of the tank struck other houses and they crumpled like eggs. How we escaped, I am at a loss to explain. Little short of a miracle.
To say a house cracked like
Crumpled like an egg.
Crumbled like an egg. Oh my God.
Yeah. B.E. Kingsley, who was a worker at the Bay State Railway, was equally as close to the tank when it broke. He said where the tank stood, there was no tank. Instead was a mighty wall of some kind, a giant wave of molasses, and it was sweeping rapidly down upon the office, gaining momentum every second. I turned and ran into the outer office, calling a warning into the clerks there. So he and his co-workers ran for the exit, but it was too late because a 15-foot wave of molasses hit the building and sent everyone and everything inside flying as the building collapsed around them.
Jesus.
It wasn't just those working under the tank or near the tank that suffered, though, as more than 2 million gallons of molasses was tearing through the very narrow streets. It swept up everything, people, animals, everything, hurling them several feet into the air, just sucking them down. Damn. Those not in the direct path of the flood still risked being hit by heavy timbers and other debris that was flying out of this flood. When the Clowerty's house was toppled by the wave, Martin's mother, 65-year-old Bridget Clowerty, was picked up by the wave and thrown across the street.
Oh my God.
Bridget landed hard on the ground, and then a large piece of the home's roof fell on top of her and crushed her to death.
Oh my God.
It's unthinkable.
You live 64 years and that's how you go out?
Yeah.
Jesus.
It's
so violent.
Oh, it's awful. It's brutal. That's the thing.
It's violent.
And what's crazy is this is sometimes looked at, especially from like people outside of like Massachusetts or Boston, as like, oh, the Great Molasses Flood, like silly. It used to smell like molasses in Boston afterwards on hot days, and it's like
that's horrible because it's just
and it's
a
like
reminder.
you don't, but nobody teaches anybody about it. So it's like you. Of course, it sounds hilarious.
Sounds hyperbolic.
The name, the Great Molasses Flood, sounds hilarious. It sounds like it would be whimsical and smell like gingerbread.
It sounds like something that would happen on fucking Phineas and Ferb.
It does. It just sounds silly.
Yeah.
It wasn't. No. It was very, very, very brutal. It really was.
People lost people that they loved.
And in horrible ways.
Yeah.
The other members of the Clowerty family made it out of their house, but it would be several hours before they learned the fate of their mother.
Oh.
Yeah. The wave of molasses struck the area hard, but an equally serious problem was getting into the area to help those that were affected by all of this.
People are just trapped because it's also just like, doesn't it harden after a while too?
Yeah, it gets
molasses?
like crusty and shit. Our guy, Frankie McManus, he was working his usual beat. You know Frankie's beat.
Of course I know Frankie's beat.
His beat's in the North End.
Yeah.
And he was working there when the tank collapsed. And he was the first to report the disaster. He made the report from an emergency call box 1234. McManus reported an explosion on the wharf and requested fire crews to be sent to the scene immediately. Roughly 15 minutes later, McManus placed a second call, this time from a different call box, clarifying that the explosion had destroyed the molasses tank and released the entire contents into the street. There were apparently 35 people injured taken to the relief hospital in the ambulances of the police department.
Wow.
And McManus reported at the time that one man, 67-year-old John Sieberlich, was killed at the time. It would turn out that this was just the beginning of a very much larger death toll.
Yeah.
In a matter of just 5 minutes, the entire North End waterfront had been destroyed. So much property demolished and so much lives lost. Like, it's so tragic. Now, that evening, after everything had kind of settled, a relief station for those directly affected by the disaster was set up in Haymarket Square. Mm-hmm. Rather than waste time taking the injured across town to those ambulances and other vehicles were brought the injured to Haymarket, where, you know, they could just try to set up like some kind of field hospital, essentially. Yeah. Basically, and how they described it was struggling men covered from head to foot, eyes and ears and mouth with black molasses.
Oh my God.
They received treatment there for various injuries. In at least 3 cases, the victims were so heavily coated in molasses that it took some time in cleaning before emergency providers realized they were already dead.
Oh, God.
Because they were just so heavily coated. Now, further complicating matters was the large crowd that had gathered at the relief station in the hours after the tank collapse. As soon as the news of the disaster started making its way around the city, concerned residents, many with friends and loved ones who worked on the wharf, showed up at Haymarket looking for confirmation that they were safe.
Right.
One report said some of these remained throughout the afternoon waiting for definite news. And long into the night, these relatives continued to come into the station for information.
Oh, that's so sad to think that people went that long without knowing what happened.
Yeah. Now, this is really sad, this next one. Among those who were seeking horrific answers was the family of Maria and Antonio D'Estasio, two North End kids who had been out on the wharf on their school lunch break to collect firewood for their father.
Oh my God.
Just before the tank collapsed, Antonio was crouched behind the tank, watching as his sister was reprimanded by two railroad workers for playing near the docks. The last thing Antonio remembered was seeing the horrified looks on the men's faces as from behind Maria D'Estasio, they watched the support beams under the molasses tank buckle.
Oh, God.
Antonio recalled seeing something large moving out of the corner of his eye, and then everything went black. Now, the children's parents learned that Antonio had been at the relief station, but had since been taken to City Hospital for treatment. No one at the relief station had seen or heard from Maria.
Oh.
Later, they would learn the horrific fate of their daughter. When the tank broke open, Maria had been standing directly in the path of the giant wave and was engulfed immediately. She was 10 years old.
Oh my God.
10 years old, and she was immediately asphyxiated by the molasses.
The only thing that you can say there is at least it was immediate.
Thank goodness, but
like,
my
you hope
goodness.
that she didn't suffer at all.
I just can't even.
10 years old.
And what's even sadder, a few hours later, a firefighter spotted Maria's, quote, tangled hair swirling in a sea of dark molasses, and he pulled her from the liquid. It was immediately apparent that they could not save her.
Right.
Antonio, on the other hand, was the least bit more fortunate. His injuries were severe. He had a fractured skull and a concussion.
Oh my God.
But a firefighter managed to grab him and pull him out of the molasses before he was completely consumed by it. Oh. So, thank goodness for those firefighters.
Seriously, straight up heroes.
Yeah. Police and fire officials arrived to the scene quickly following the call from Officer McManus, and having heard reports of an explosion, were immediately confused by, a lack of fire.
Right.
But they immediately began combing the neighborhood looking for survivors, pulling people from, the molasses, from ruins of houses, businesses, warehouses, anywhere. They were just trying to find anyone that survived this. Meanwhile, the fire department began blasting the streets with water, hoping to wash the molasses into the drains. But the sheer quantity of this sugary, thick syrup...
Yeah, you're not just going to wash it away.
Yeah, it just wasn't working. They got a little bit, but it's going to be tedious and it's going to take a lot of time.
Right.
While emergency responders worked to pull people to safety and removed all the, dangerous debris from the streets, medical workers soon arrived at the scene to provide emergency treatment. Parker Hill Hospital, for example, sent a full surgical staff and more than 80 medical privates and 10 ambulances to provide first aid.
Wow.
In another place near the North End, the nurses from the Metropolitan chapter of the Red Cross wasted no time wading into knee-deep molasses to reach injured survivors. They just fucking...
That's incredible.
Went. Yeah. And they would carry them out on stretchers to the relief center or nearby hospitals for treatment. Led by Mrs. Carlisle Emery, within a half hour of the collapse, Emery's team of Red Cross volunteers had mobilized more than a dozen ambulances. Wow. And those who weren't involved in the transport or treatment of injured people still stayed at the scene to provide information and just comfort victims, or to serve coffee and meals to firefighters and police officials. Community came together in a big way. Those working in the areas nearest to the tank were obviously likely the most in danger, both during and after the collapse. And after the initial wave of the molasses had moved inward from the docks, the men working in the freight houses of the Bay State Street Railway Company, they had been hit really hard. The flood had hit the buildings even harder. They had knocked down the walls. They'd buried several workers under the debris. I mean, it was like the closer you got in, the worse this became.
Right.
Those who weren't pinned down by debris were stranded. They just couldn't get out. I mean, there's a whole river of molasses. Just you can't go swimming in it. And they could really do little to help their more seriously hurt coworkers. So they were just kind of stranded and helpless.
Right.
According to H.P. Palmer, who was an accountant with Bay State, Tides of molasses were rushing in all directions, and people who heard the cries of the injured and dying were prevented from going to their aid by the molasses. Ultimately, axemen would spend hours cutting away debris to reach the injured.
Just to think that there was tides.
Tides of
molasses going everywhere.
And they're hearing screams of people dying and injured, and like they can't help anybody. They're just all you're like being stranded in like the middle of the sea surrounded by sharks.
Yeah.
You just can't do anything.
Yeah.
Although the wave of molasses had subsided at this point and rescuers had come to the scene, many people were still in danger of being discovered too late by rescue workers. The firemen of Engine 31, for example, were trapped inside the station when the wave hit.
Oh my God.
It knocked the building in on itself and trapped the firemen inside.
Oh.
Yeah, while several were able to pull themselves out of the rubble, several others remained pinned down by debris, with the tide of molasses slowly rising around them.
Oh my God, that's fucking...
Yeah. That's horrific.
You can't...
Horror
show.
Oh my God. The building had collapsed in such a way and at such an angle that the molasses was able to just flow in.
You couldn't even write that in a movie.
It's crazy. So the molasses can flow into this building that's collapsed on itself, but the only means of it flowing out was a small hole in the side of the building. And as a result, the men inside faced the very real possibility of just drowning in molasses, being smothered. Unreal. Which is what would happen.
Unreal.
As one of the few who had freed himself, firefighter Bill Connor worked tirelessly to keep the others calm as the sticky molasses is just crawling over every inch of their bodies and threatening to kill them.
Yeah.
And he's staying there trying to calm his coworkers and trying to help. At the relief center, Suffolk County Medical Examiner Dr. George McGrath worked slowly and methodically to provide whatever support he could. Later, he would describe the injured bodies, saying, quote, "They looked as though they were covered in heavy oil skins. Their faces, of course, were covered with molasses, eyes and ears, mouths and nose filled with it." Like,
oh my God, that's so awful.
When they say smother, they mean you smother.
Yeah.
McGrath and the other medical providers spent much of their time just washing the injured with sodium bicarbonate and hot water, eventually revealing their identity and the extent of their injuries. Because, like, people would come in and they wouldn't even know what they were injured with because they couldn't see it.
Because they're coated.
Yeah. The extent of the damage caused by the collapse of the molasses vat was far-reaching and honestly difficult to articulate at this point. The collapse of many buildings and the destabilization of the wharf was a very real danger to everyone on the scene. Mm-hmm. Everything was destabilized. You didn't know if you were standing on something that was going to collapse. But that was really only one piece of the whole devastation. Larger pieces of infrastructure, like the girders of the elevated train line, had also collapsed, serving as an impediment to the cleanup efforts.
Yeah.
In the days that followed, huge teams of men worked slowly, carrying debris away or pulling the larger pieces away with trucks, but it was slow going. Right. Once the debris had been moved, a second team came in behind the first to just look for more injured survivors. In some cases, rescuers arrived just in time to prevent somebody from being overtaken by the molasses. Like literally their head and face barely in the surface, and they would just get to them in time. And this would be like days of somebody sitting in molasses.
Oh my God.
Waiting to be either smothered to death or rescued.
And just sitting there and being cognizant of that the entire time.
That this could be it.
Oh.
In the days after the flood, the men working to clear the area would continue to find bodies among the wreckage as well. By the 18th, the death toll had risen to 13, as those who were the most injured in the flood succumbed to their injuries as well. A day later, 2 more bodies were discovered among the wreckage, and they said they were so battered and glazed over by the molasses that identification was difficult.
Oh, that's awful.
Among the last to be discovered was 17-year-old Eric Laird, who was a teamster from Charlestown who was working on the docks when the tank collapsed. Laird had been working in one of the freight houses when the flood hit, and his body was wedged so tightly under the front axle of a car that workers had to, quote, jack up the truck and saw pieces of the wreckage before they could retrieve the body.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
17 years old.
It's really sad. Now, ultimately, it would take nearly a full week to clear away most of the large debris, with men working around the clock spraying down the neighborhood with jets of water from fire trucks, and nearly every hydrant in the North End was being used. I mean, it was just the Molasses had covered several blocks of the city in depths of 2 to 3 feet. So once the syrup had been washed away, large teams of men would follow behind, scrubbing every surface with stiff bristle brushes to try to get it all, because it's just sticky shit now. Yeah. By the time everything had been cleared away, the flood was determined to have caused millions of dollars in property and infrastructure damage.
Can imagine.
Injured more than 150 people and killed the following 21 people.
21 people.
Patrick Breen, William Brogan, Bridget Clougherty, Stephen Clougherty, John Callahan, Maria DeStasio, William Duffy, Peter Francis, Flaminio Gallerani, Pasquale Lentosca, Michael Sinnott, James Kennedy, Eric Laird, George Leahy, James Lennon, Ralph Martin, James McMullen, Caesar Nicolo, Thomas Noonan, Peter Shaughnessy, and John Sieberlich.
It's so sad.
We have people in their 60s. We have a 10-year-old. We have a 17-year-old. We have some 20-year-olds. We have 2 10-year-olds. Pasquale Lentosca is also a 10-year-old. Peter Shaughnessy is 18 years old. Peter Sinnott is 78 years old.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's devastating.
It is. It's tragic.
Now, once the initial shock and trauma of the event had subsided and they could survey the damage, what everyone wanted to know was, how the fuck did this happen?
Right.
What happened? Like,
it sounds like it was just built too quickly.
And they didn't know that. So everybody's like, what the fuck happened? Did an explosion happen?
Looking back now.
Yeah. When he visited the disaster zone in the North End the day the tank collapsed, Mayor Andrew Peters told the press, quote, "Boston is appalled at the terrible accident that occurred today in the North End. On behalf of her citizens, I extend to the families of those who were injured and of those who lost their lives our most heartfelt sympathy. An occurrence of this kind must not and cannot pass without a rigid investigation to determine the cause of the explosion, not only to prevent a reoccurrence of such a frightful accident, but to place the responsibility where it belongs."
Yeah.
Now, Peter's statement was exactly what one would have expected from a politician in the wake of a tragedy.
Absolutely.
But it turned out that determining the cause of the collapse and identifying a responsible party was going to be a little more challenging than anyone had anticipated.
Yeah.
By the following day, the Massachusetts District Police's explosive expert, Walter Wedger, stated he was, quote, strongly inclined to the belief that there was an explosion rather than just a collapse.
Okay.
According to Wedger, quote, if there was only a collapse, fragments of the tank would not have been hurled against the elevated structure and caused such wreckage there, nor would the vehicle on Commercial Street have been blown to atoms.
I guess that makes sense.
While the Boston police conducted their investigation, the USIA announced they would be conducting their own investigation under the direction of Arthur Gell and led by professors Arthur Gill and Arthur Miller. So many Arthurs.
I love that it's just a committee of Arthurs.
Yeah, just Arthurs. And they were professors of Harvard and MIT, respectively.
I mean, I believe them.
Yeah. So a representative from USIA told the press, "We feel sure there was no explosion. And if there was, it was caused by some outside force and not from within the tank."
Well, it could have been within the tank because the tank is so pressurized.
Exactly. That's the thing.
I don't think there has to be an outside explosion.
No. In the weeks after that, the USIA's investigation focused on their theory that, quote, an anarchist climbed a ladder and dropped a pipe bomb into the fermentation vent. And that's what caused the tank to explode.
That's quite the leap.
Just an anarchist.
Like, what kind of anarchist gets that? I don't think,
damn.
I don't think most people would say, you know what I'm going to do today? I think I'm going to explode the molasses tank down the street.
It's strange.
Like, I don't know how that would occur to you,
It's a strange message.
It is.
To send.
What exactly are you trying to say?
Yeah. Now, the thing is, as we can be like, that's silly business. But it wasn't totally out of the realm of possibility.
Okay.
Because in the early decades of the 20th century, anarchists around the United States did use bombings or the threat of bombings to take a stand against anti-immigration politicians and corporations they believed were exploiting workers. So, like, it's silly to, like, think about, like, somebody climbing a molasses tank and throwing a pipe bomb, but you can see why they at least threw the theory out there.
Yeah.
Because also they just don't understand how this is all working.
Well, you got to start somewhere.
Exactly. So USIA attorney Henry Dolan said, "We know beyond question that the tank was not weak." And you have to remember, they're saving their own ass.
Yeah, because that's a
they can't
whole
say
ass lie.
Maybe it just broke and burst. They have to blame it on something like an anarchist climbing the thing.
Right.
He said, we know that an examination was made of the outside of the base of the structure a few minutes before its collapse. And he insisted that whatever happened, it was not the company's fault. Despite USIA's certainty that they were not to blame, District Attorney Joseph Pelletier took the case to the grand jury, seeking an indictment against USIA for 19 counts of manslaughter, clearly believing they were to blame for the disaster.
I kind of get it.
On February 13th, the grand jury reviewed the case and found that while the tank did not completely comply with the law fixing a minimum factor of safety, there was insufficient evidence to justify the indictment. Yeah.
Okay.
Simply put, the court and the state's investigators rejected USIA's bomb theory and believed that shoddy craftsmanship was at least partially to blame for the tank collapse, but that there wasn't enough evidence to prove it. So they said, no, we don't think somebody threw a bomb into the thing.
Yeah.
We do think there was some structural issues, but we don't think there was enough to prove that.
I feel like the entire molasses flood should be enough evidence to prove that
I think that's
some
pretty
of
good
those,
evidence.
Some of those faulty bits there had like that. That's all you really need.
Well, and in the months then years that followed, the courts would rule against the company in civil cases, ordering them to pay millions in damages.
Yeah, so they basically said,
yeah. The biggest problem investigators had when it came to identifying the party or parties responsible for the collapse was that it was impossible to say with certainty what had caused the tank to explode.
Right.
In fact, to this day, it's still pretty unclear what precisely happened to unleash that giant of an explosion, though there were several plausible theories. The most prominent and most likely scenario, and the one that investigators had considered in their early investigation, is that the dramatic increase in warm weather triggered the fermentation process, causing a buildup of carbon dioxide inside the small headspace of the tank.
Yeah.
And if the tank had been properly constructed and held to high standards of safety, it likely could have withstood that buildup of gases. Right. But in Gel's race to beat prohibition, he had allowed the tank to build pretty quickly and kind of poorly. Mm-hmm. And under the circumstances, the tank walls were unable to withstand that pressure build.
Yeah.
And when it became too much, the entire structure just exploded. I mean, that's what pressure does.
That makes the most sense.
Think about a pressure cooker.
There's 2 million, right?
2.3 million,
2.3 million
gallons
of fucking molasses in there. So it's not like it just exploded and like some molasses oozed out.
No,
it makes sense that much
chaos.
Exactly, that much like tragedy fell.
Because molasses is also a thick, viscous liquid.
Yes.
If it's exploding, it's taking out everything because it's thick. It's got some mass behind it. Mm-hmm. It's not like this is just something with nothing behind it.
It's not like a water tank. You know?
Like even that would cause damage. Like, and you look at how thick molasses is in comparison to water.
Yeah.
Of course.
And like heavy.
Exactly. And just think of a pressure cooker.
Yeah,
how much damage those can do.
That's the best way to think of it.
That's essentially what it was. It was a pressure cooker.
I was just going to say.
Now, when considering the entire scenario, author Stephen Paleo wrote his good name.
His good name.
Author Stephen with his good name.
I don't want to mess up his good name.
No. He wrote, the substance itself gives the entire event an unusual whimsical quality.
Yes.
Allowing for it to easily fall into the category of folklore that's, like told half seriously year to year.
Yep.
In fact, one of the more lighthearted facts of the story is that for decades after the flood, the North End still smelled of molasses on warm days. But and people will say even now, they'll be like, oh, even now on warm days, you can just smell molasses. And it's like, like what?
Also, you can't.
Yeah.
But imagine how triggering that was for people who had lost a loved one or like
you can
themselves
smell
been
it.
Injured.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. And it's like, so
it's like
that was always like the thing. That was like a funny thing. Like, oh, on warm days, you can still smell the molasses so much it leaked into the landscape. But like the reality of the flood was anything but humorous or whimsical. It just wasn't.
No.
Because of its chemical makeup, molasses, like we said, is real thick, real goopy. And given the right amount of stress and pressure, it can pick up momentum very quickly and move at insane speeds.
35 miles an hour? Like you drive in your car at that fucking speed.
Ferris Jaber wrote in Scientific American, because of this physical property, a wave of molasses is even more devastating than a typical tsunami.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Like we said, moving at speeds nearly 35 miles per hour, the flood grabbed everything in its path because it was also sticky.
Could grab onto things.
Yep. Yeah. And it would toss it into the air or crush it under the immense weight of the liquid itself. And once it settled, the liquid returned to a more gelatinous state, which would trap people, animals, and property in like an iron vice grip.
Oh.
Even more terrifying is the fact that because of its viscosity, it's almost impossible to move, much less swim in molasses.
Right.
So if you found yourself dragged under the wave, you would have died a terrible death.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't move.
Exactly.
You were just being eaten by it, essentially. It is only due to the incline of Copp's Hill that the flood slowed down at all. Like, thank goodness there was an incline.
Yeah.
Because if the landscape had been a downhill slope, the death toll would have been considerably higher. It would have taken out hundreds of people. Oh. Despite the horror of this whole thing, there was some good that came out of it. At the time of the flood, Americans were pretty accustomed to courts ruling in favor of corporate interests over those of the people.
Yeah.
And as such, most people likely assumed no one would be held accountable for the disaster, even though the evidence was strongly suggesting lax safety protocols and sloppy work. But to everyone's great surprise, Bostonians soon learned that sometimes the courts will do the right thing.
All right.
In the years-long civil suits that followed, Judge High Ogden repeatedly ruled in favor of victims over the USIA.
Hell yeah.
Frequently awarding more to those victims whose suffering had been substantial, too. Ogden basically awarded $6,000 or nearly $600,000 today to people who were killed immediately, like 10-year-old Maria DeSazio, because she was killed instantly. So he would award that to her family.
They deserved that.
And according to my good man, Stephen.
Good man, good name.
He said then he gave $7,500 to people who suffered before they died. Wow. Like George Leahy, he was trapped in the basement of a firehouse in this little 18-inch crawl space and tried to keep his head above molasses for 4 hours before he was asphyxiated.
Oh my God. What a horrific way to die.
Horrific.
You can't put a price on that.
Oh, no, you can't. But the disaster also had a significant influence on the realm of public safety, both in Massachusetts and around the country. Mm-hmm. Following the flood, new regulations were put in place that, it did a lot, but it would also require architects and engineers to show their work and get their plans signed off on by building inspectors and safety regulators.
That's crazy that wasn't already a thing that was happening.
My good man, Stephen, said the Great Boston Molasses Flood did for building construction standards what the Coconut Grove fire did for fire standards.
It's so wild because the entire time we've been talking about the Molasses Flood, I've been thinking about the Coconut Grove. Yeah. Because that was also a devastating event that changed the history of Boston.
Of course, yeah. Now, all of those who experienced the molasses flood firsthand have since died. And these days, the story kind of rarely comes up in discussion of Boston's history.
It really doesn't.
But thanks to my good man, Stephen Palaio, and local journalists, those who lost their lives in the Great Molasses Flood of 1919 remain remembered today, thankfully, because they won't let them forget.
No, that's an important story to tell.
And it's Stephen Puello, I think it is. Puello, I believe it is.
I think that's what you had said.
Yeah, I think I said it wrong. I apologize if I said it wrong. My good man, Stephen.
Wow.
We're linking all his sources in the show notes, so you can definitely go take a look at what he has to say.
Go support
my good man, Stephen, with his good name.
Wow. That is a tragic fucking tale, dude.
It's a very tragic tale, and it really is
interesting, though.
Wild that they don't... There should be, in Massachusetts at the very least, it should be a whole section in history.
I mean, think of how much time, which, again, we should.
Yeah.
We spend on the Salem witch trials because we're in the area. And I never, ever learned about this.
Teach people about this because it's also, it's a good lesson in how doing things quickly and cutting corners can lead to absolute catastrophe.
Yeah, disastrous events.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that is the tale of the Great Molasses Flood in Boston.
Well, thank you so much for that. As tragic as it was, it was definitely a fascinating tale.
You can read up more about it.
Yeah, a little deviation from murder, which is always nice.
Yeah, it's a different kind of tragedy.
Yeah.
One that is interesting and needs to be talked about more.
Yeah, because those people need to be remembered.
Yeah, for sure.
But as always, we hope you continue No, what?
I mean,
We hope you keep listening.
And we hope you
keep
it
weird. You know how weird to keep it.
Yeah, just don't cut corners.
No.
Don't whole ass everything. Don't half ass things.
Yeah.